Welcome to North Code, the #1 podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I'm your host, Dusty O'Connell. Joining me for episode 126. This one's going to be a corker, as they say. Vikings blogger extraordinaire, in-house analyst, and generally useful human, Arif Hassan. How you doing, Arif?
I'm good. Is that what they say? Did they say corker?
I've heard it before. I've heard at least one person say it this week. And that person was on television. So
okay.
I trust their judgment.
Must be true.
You're not exhausted from podcasting yet?
Not yet. We'll see.
Excellent, because we have a phenomenal guest this week. One of the co-owners of Football Guys, the premier fantasy strategy site with tons of fantasy data and great articles that you can subscribe to if you choose. In fact, maybe you'll want to after this episode. Joining us this week, Sigmund Bloom. How you doing, Sigmund?
I'm great. This is a fantastic time in the football calendar because those of us that are still listening to podcasts, reading, we're obsessive. We make it our business to know everything about everything in the NFL world. So we have a lot of conversations at a level of discourse that is more difficult to find during the season, during the frenzy. And it's a terrific community to be a part of every iteration, every year. I think that we're like a flower opening up. It's really fantastic to see all the great work and to be part of all the great work out there. And I want to take a moment out to say to the Vikings fans out there that first, I'm a Western Pennsylvania born and bred Steelers fan, born in 1975. But in 1998, when the Steelers were down in the 80s, I was a big fan of the Buddy Ryan Eagles. So I was really excited to see Randall Cunningham get a chance in 98. And, of course, Gary Anderson, that's like an all-time Pittsburgh Steeler. And I was really – the Broncos, you make it your business to hate the Broncos if you're an AFC fan of any other team than the Broncos. So it was really painful. I'm not as painful as it was for Vikings fans, but certainly that NFC title game was one that sticks. And then the Favre to Greg Lewis. I have a good friend who's from Minnesota, big Vikings fan, and we watched the Favre to Greg Lewis pass, and we both agree that it galvanized the team and something really special was going to happen with that team. And something special did, but once again, the pain. And I say this as a Steelers fan because, it goes back to the first Steelers victory. But I just want to send out those sympathetic vibes.
All right.
Yeah. I remember those moments, and I was certainly very sad in those moments. And hopefully we'll have at least some moments to be sad together. If not, maybe one of these times get over the hump.
Well, I mean, let's not go too far, Sigmund.
Come on, Teddy.
Dude, that's great.
Hey, draft Twitter dictates that Teddy has to get a ring at some point.
Draft Twitter's turned on Teddy, didn't you see?
No. It's so fickle.
Doesn't throw enough touchdowns, man. That's what they say.
That's Norb's fault.
I mean, you'll find no greater friend to that argument than on this podcast. But I'm just saying, that's what Draft Twitter's putting out there. They either believe in quarterback wins or in touchdown percentage, but they don't believe in Teddy. That's all we can say.
That's exactly. Teddy has them right where he wants them, if that's how they feel.
Right? It's perfect.
And realistically, the issues with the Vikings they're larger than any one player.
Well, certainly.
We'll just jump right into some Viking stuff here. I think it's larger than any one player with respect to are they getting the most out of what they have. But I think that clearly the momentum of the organization is positive, and I think if Blair Walsh hadn't missed that field goal, we'd have a different feel going into this offseason. I hate to reduce it down to one play, but it's the challenge for the team to turn that around and not let that bad taste sink in.
Well, I think actually reducing it to one play shows within it like a lot of potential for positivity because there's
right.
Because there's so much and there's a lot of instances in that game where you're just one play away. Like, if it wasn't for, the Adrian Peterson fumble, for example, the Vikings almost truly win, right? Mm-hmm. And so, the idea that they were just a play away, I think speaks to sort of the overall quality of the team. And, you look at the Arizona game, the Denver game, if you can remember back that far.
Yeah, no.
The Vikings were functionally one play away from
and let's
Super Bowl
look at
champions. Right?
let's take the Denver game in particular, and in hindsight now with context, we can say Teddy Bridgewater looked about as capable against that Denver defense as any quarterback did all season. Maybe Ben Roethlisberger. You know, Ben Roethlisberger and the Steelers had the right personnel and the right approach to attack that defense. Very few teams did. But Teddy Bridgewater, and this is what bodes well for the future, because what you want to see is, sure, the home mode, the default game script for this team, you know, the classic boring game to watch. And that a boring Vikings game to watch is probably exactly what they set out to put out there. But they can change modes. Teddy can change modes when it's called for. And, you know, we were denied a chance to see how he would have reacted to the hostile environment in Carolina and to see what he could learn in that experience. But there will be more opportunities. Like, as you're saying, like, we feel like this team may be disappointed or underperformed or didn't give us that much excitement. But at the same time, they played against a team that is very well tested in the playoffs, has a lot of players with playoff experience, unlike the Vikings. And the Vikings outplayed them. So I think everything is pointing positively, but then again, I'm one of the members of Draft Twitter who has not turned on Teddy.
All right. Well, that puts you in shockingly rare company, but I think a lot of Vikings fans are very, very optimistic about Teddy, less optimistic about the offensive line. Vikings have made a lot of changes to that regard, or at least a lot of additions. I don't know how many changes they'll end up making. A lot of additions in that regard. This week, I think sort of the money quote for a lot of Vikings fans is, the fact that Zimmer texted both Adrian Peterson and Teddy Bridgewater, no more excuses. I think after they signed Alex Bowen, he texted that out, I think that's a positive thing, right? Because now the spotlight is on you. The biggest thing holding you back is gone, and now it's all your responsibility. And I think that's exciting to me.
Yeah, this year should mark a transition in their own internal expectations. And the personnel that they've been putting together. I haven't mentioned the name Rick Spielman yet, and I know no one has a 100% report card as a GM, but he is the best, as we're a month away from the draft now. I think he's the best out of all 32, whoever the brain trust is, it isn't always the GM, at playing the game of the draft. And whether the picks work out or not, he understands. He's like the classic poker player that is confident in his reads and will make plays based on confidence in those reads and not hedge or not play it safe. And I think it has put the team in a position, sure, the Cordell Patterson pick missed. But setting up those kinds of plays means that when this team does find a way to get a few more of these holes filled, then they're going to be a dangerous team. So I'm excited about the Vikings. And yes, I will certainly be rooting against them. So you all will love this out there because I don't know why. I love rooting against the Packers. I love rooting against Aaron Rodgers and Mike McCarthy. I like seeing them lose. And I look forward to hopefully the Vikings sending them to more
big fan of
losses.
The show, Sigmund Bloom.
Yes. I don't know what it is about Aaron Rodgers. There's just something about him that I enjoy.
You don't need a reason at this point. We're 100% on board on having completely irrational hatred of Aaron Rodgers. Yeah. It's probably because he plays the game the wrong way. He's arrogant. He showboats all the time.
He remembers everybody that's ever said anything bad about him ever.
Oh, okay. That's actually a legitimate gripe I have with him.
Yeah.
That was 2005. Let it go.
Exactly.
Yeah, he's kind of a crybaby.
Yeah.
Yeah. But this is not the Hate on Aaron Rodgers podcast as much as we'll tail off into that direction we've got.
This is like being on the airplane when they're like, and if you're not going to Los Angeles, then perhaps you should change your plane now. Go ahead.
Exactly. This is your opportunity to disembark.
Right.
So Norse Code is sorry, I'll get the promotional stuff out of the way and then we can get back to the fun stuff. Norse Code is brought to you entirely by you, the listener. It is because of your generous donations in kind every month that we are able to continue bringing you amazing guests like Sigmund and a sweet-sounding show every week of the year, or, maybe every other week as summer comes. But with your renewed commitment to Norse Code comes our renewed commitment to digital multimedia content. So please consider giving us a couple of bucks. #content. Check out our PayPal link at paypal.me/NorseCode or our Patreon page at patreon.com/NorseCode. You can either be a one-time donor or a recurring donor. skip one latte a month and give us that $3.50 instead, and ensure that Norse Code can go on in perpetuity. If that does not appeal to you, then the Mike Zimmer Foundation is certainly a worthy cause to donate your dollars to. And they've got some pretty sweet t-shirts for sale in their shop, which we will have a link to in the show notes. My favorite is, there two of them are popular Zimmer quotes, and one of them is a shirt that says, Vote Zimmer 2016. It's like a screen print of him in front of American flag. It's pretty great. But my favorite of the t-shirts is the one that says, "Don't tell me about the labor, just show me the baby." Which
Isn't that just like beautiful and perfectly Zimmer? It's I love it.
Just show me the baby. Just show me the baby. So buy a t-shirt if you like. If not that, then I'm sure Sigmund would appreciate it if you signed up for footballguys.com. Subscriptions are an excellent value for the quality of analysis you get for your fantasy football team throughout the season.
Yeah, we brought our guest on. We didn't even talk about sort of why he's quote-unquote qualified to talk about football. Let's talk a little bit about that segment. Not meant to grow you, just let's talk a little bit about footballguys.com.
Yeah.
Huge in the fantasy community right now. Amazing resource. I used their DFS resources a lot last year. Helped me win more than a little bit of money, which was nice. But this website, it kind of, I don't want to say it appeared overnight. It's been around for a long time, but it's sprung up from the ground from people who just, love football, and it doesn't really have, a big media feel. How did it, all get started?
Yeah, and I came in a little bit later on, like 2005. I think the site started around 2000. The first big internet football boom, and Joe Bryant, I think, was doing cheatsheets.net, and David Dodds was doing Mr. Football, and they combined forces. And really, it is a community curated. And what's beautiful is this is a model that we've now seen with sites like Norse Code, a lot of the great team blogs that have now turned into more definitive team sites, not necessarily in the old media B writer style, but a lot of passion, a lot of knowledge, and less bounds on the way you go about sharing your passion through your work. Whether it's about a team or about fantasy football, it's been a wonderful model because the media in the pre-internet era was not democratic. You didn't really choose the beat writer or the anchor or whoever it was, and now you can choose and create help. As you just got done telling people, you can help make the kind of content that you want to be out there. So Football Guys was a site where almost exclusively for a while the writers were hired out of the message board, out of the subscribers, and that was how I was able to get my foot in the door. I would write articles and post them on the message board. And it's a beautiful community that way because everybody has come up through the community and understands the shared values. And again, like you said, just passion about football. And of course, we apply that to fantasy football advice and analysis. And as fantasy football has changed, we've changed. Again, you mentioned DFS. There's apps, there's different tools that you can use, algorithms and things to calculate optimal lineups based on our projections and things like that, and bankroll management and so on. And of course, good old traditional fantasy football drafts and waiver wire pickups and things. But more than that, it's the shared experience, it's the shared journey. We've got our podcast, The Audible. We do 8 episodes a week during the season, and any number of episodes, about 300 episodes a year when it's all said and done. And it's mainly about the community and mainly about sharing the experience. And I think that there's so many great outlets now, and I'm really taken aback that so many people still want to hear what I have to say. And I'm very pleased to be able to do that on your great show. I've always been a fan of, I've always been a fan of your work, Arif, and also just everything that's been going on out in our community. It's really humbling to get to be part of this community with people that I know that are very committed and devoted to producing great content.
Yeah. Well, first, I appreciate that. Second, it does seem like we're in like a boom. Like I don't want to call it a bubble because that implies it'll pop, but certainly a boom in terms of just fantastic football content. Some of it comes from a lot of those younger guys, like 18. It's so weird for me to say younger guys now, but like 18, 19-year-olds. They're in college right now. They're putting out this phenomenal work on like how to scout quarterbacks, how to scout defensive linemen. There's that, and then you've got, and I think a lot of people speak about Pro Football Focus negatively, and for me, the default
Mike Zimmer, for instance.
Positively. Mike Zimmer.
Where's the shirt with that quote?
Might have to make that one ourselves. That one would sell pretty well. But yeah, the default is to be like, hey, these guys, I don't really know what they're talking about. But I think that they've, advanced the conversation phenomenally. And the pushback against them has advanced the conversation phenomenally. And
sure.
There's a bunch of different websites, a bunch of different ways and areas that you can find your now. So, I mean, we'll no longer rely on, one or two sources of information. I love, Mel Kiper and Todd McShay, and you always have to pay respect to Kiper for sort of creating the idea of draft media. But now, there's a guy I can go to talk about quarterbacks. There's a guy I can talk about defensive linemen, linebackers, and then there's like 2 or 3 guys sometimes. I mean, I love seeing like Derek Clausen talk about quarterbacks and then see, if Matt Waldman disagrees, if you disagree. Right. It's stunning, and I think that what you've done and what you've built has helped contribute to that in a big way. But it also sort of grounds a lot of the conversation because you've become, I don't want to say a content aggregator, but sort of Football Guys has become a destination website where we can so for example, you've got this week in NFL news, something that you produce every week. There's an email subscription, I think by Bryant, that comes out. It gives you the injury news every week during the season, tells you, what the fantasy impact is. But that's just basically football news. Right. The site's enormous. Like, how does this happen?
Well, we have 60 some writers now, all with different areas of specialty, all with different backgrounds. It's one of the great things about Football Guys is people are bringing in their day jobs. We have one staff member who's a hedge fund manager. We have another staff member who was a teacher. We have another staff member who is at executive level, in a Fortune 500 company and so on. Don't quote me on that Fortune 500. I think it's really close. Anyway, my point is this, that people are bringing in their background from their day job or their training. I'm trained as an attorney. I always say I'm a dormant attorney, like a dormant volcano. And you can see it in our work and the way that we do it. It's really excellent. And we have – so this goes back to some things that you were saying. One thing I want to say about the content, people that are creating this great content, is the barriers to entry are so much lower than they were even 10 years ago, and certainly 20 or 30 years ago, where you can edit your own video, you can create your own graphics, you can distribute. Basically, the internet, you're distributing something to the whole world. It's just a question of people finding out about it. That wasn't possible a very short time ago. That was not possible, and I think the fact that also you mentioned the youth, those youngins. I'm 40, so I'm old enough now to say you're not old enough to remember this when I talk about things like this, but. It's really beautiful.
I remember back in the AOL fan house days.
Yeah, whenever we had to use dot matrix printers and floppy disks. No, but it's beautiful because there's an attitude of I'm not going to wait for someone to tell me what to do. I'm not going to wait for someone to show me how to do it. I'm just going to figure it out myself, and I'm going to make the content that I want to make. And it is advancing the conversation. And then you have this other thing happening where, as you started to mention, there's so many great names, it's impossible to name all of them. But we're like an academic department at a university where even though, it can get a little bit chippy whenever, but we're borrowing from each other's work. We're challenging each other's work. We're pushing each other's work one step forward. And I think that it's really fun to watch. We're sometimes separating out into different schools of thought that clash sword and shield. And in between all of these clashes, in that creative friction, as I call it, we find something like the truth. And then we know with football, there isn't really a truth with a capital T. There's just understanding what the range of possibilities are, or understanding, because football doesn't progress in a linear way. So by having these conversations, by exploring all of these things, we can understand a little bit better what creates that range of possibilities. But none of us ever know. The players themselves don't know. The coaches don't know. So keeps us fascinated and very much stimulated, captivated, but we all can still enjoy all the conversations because the page is always turning, because the story is always written. And I think that's one of the things that we try to really come at Football Guys, where we have 60 some writers. We might have 2 writers with completely opposite takes, but as long as you explain, show your work, and the reader, the listener, can then make the decision themselves, that is of much more value, I think, than a singular, like, do this, I'm telling you what to do in fantasy football. And we do that, teach a man to fish versus give someone a fish. And I think that's what our draft world has been doing for years now. You mentioned Matt Waldman. I think Matt Waldman's RSP, which is coming out on April 1st, is tremendous. Even if you don't look at the individual takes on players, you just see his method that he continues to refine every year. You can learn about watching football in a way that is probably intuitive when you really wrap your mind around it, that the experience of the game is richer. When you see something happen on the field, it has more meaning. And I think that's one of the things that we seek. Watching football has changed from more of a rah-rah experience to something very cerebral and something that stimulates us more at a level like, my team win or lose. And it's just really a lot of fun that all of us, when this story's told, we can look back and see our place in the story. And again, I'm just happy to be in there somewhere because there's a lot of really talented people in our world now.
Yeah, well, so this question kind of comes a little bit out of nowhere. Maybe we should have prepped you. But
Sure.
In the past, like, let's say 2 years,
Right.
what do you think is sort of the biggest change in your mind when it comes to evaluating football or thinking about football or prognosticating or what have you when it comes to football?
Well, I think we've got it, and we can look at this through the draft world or through regular season football. And this goes back to what you were saying about PFF, where whether you agree or disagree with PFF, and I think that the idea of PFF and the execution of PFF have been 2 different things. And I think a lot of criticism of PFF might be in the execution of it, but the idea is tremendous. And it's something that, in hindsight, when you look back on, saying, why wasn't anybody doing this? Where you have people watch every game, record some things that are more binary, objective data, and then have other things that are more subjective data, compile it year after year, and really be able to point back at a process. Now, some of the things they've done maybe require more internal knowledge. Again, go back to Mike Zimmer. That if you're not in the room, if you don't understand, then you might attribute a failure on a play to a player who is actually doing his job and things like that. But all of the conversations that it has started have then bear fruit for other analytics people decide to take that work and maybe improve it or change it. And that is really, really important. What we're seeing now, I think, is the analytics side. And I hate to make this like an either or because the answer is both. But people taking the either or. So this is like when I do fantasy analysis, like I will sometimes take a more zealous position to one pole or the other pole, and then try to see what the most emphatic position is on the other end, and we find the truth somewhere in between. So in this case, it would be like analytics. If you can't measure something, then it doesn't really exist, and we're going to find these models. We're going to find these numbers that predict the next iteration versus the more classic in the draft community, watching tape and recording more qualitative analysis, recording things more with words than numbers. And what's fantastic is that it's not an either or proposition. We're really starting to hone in on some things like measurables, I think, are about thresholds and being above thresholds. And if you talk to somebody that dealt with the draft like 10 or 15 years ago, this was understood, but it was still very inexact and crude. And now I think you're starting to see more questioning of these things. The NFL is terrible for, well, that's the way we've always done it. People are really afraid of wandering off from the herd. And I think that we're seeing a lot more work that is allowing innovation. And wherever you locate yourself on this continuum, like tape versus analytics, if you're in the game, then we're all advancing each other's knowledge. And I don't think that was happening on a level that was so public and so easy for someone to participate in. There's so many people, most of us, I think, at some point we're just we're just a consumer of this media, and we decided we had something to contribute, and we wanted to do that. And it's really a tremendous model for accessibility. That there's not, your bona fides are, well, show me your work, let me see and that's it. And I think it's something that, again, I just can't echo enough, that it's been a great joy to be part of and continue to be part of.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So we've been doing some like really high level conversation about the way that football media has advanced. Let's take sort of the theory of like the fact that we've got more nuanced takes, we've got better access to knowledge as a result of democratization of information, and like apply it to some specific news. So I'm taking a look at This Week in NFL News. There's actually a lot going on this offseason. Maybe not as much with the Vikings, but there's a lot of things that we can fire our take cannon at.
Yeah.
I think the most obvious one is Robert Griffin. Signed with the Browns. Kind of, I don't want to say surprising, but it kind of hit me out of nowhere. I think in retrospect, I shouldn't have even expected that. But I think, signing with the Browns, I think that by itself begs the question, like, well, how many people were actually interested in him? Because, a lot of players leave the Browns. They don't tend to sign with the Browns unless they've got sort of limited options. Adam Schefter basically said that second day of free agency, to view the Browns like college. It's 4 years and you're done. Live on air.
Right.
But
remember, he's a Michigan guy, though. Remember that.
Oh, Schefter's a Michigan guy?
Schefter and Rich Eisen were roommates at Michigan.
They were roommates? Oh my gosh! I feel like I should have known that. Because I know Rich Eisen's a Michigan guy. He'll tell you right away.
Right. Yes. Yes.
But yeah, so the Browns are what they are. But I think everyone's really optimistic about Hugh Jackson. Maybe not Hugh Jackson with the Browns, but Hugh Jackson. I think he did a really good job in Oakland. And the reason he was fired from Oakland had nothing to do, I think, with him. It had everything to do with the new. You just wanted everything new. Yeah, I think is what happened in Oakland. And Hugh Jackson had been overlooked for a while, so it seems like a really good signing to me to get Hugh Jackson as your head coach, and then Robert Griffin doesn't change the quarterback plans according to them, but how do you see this changing Cleveland overall, and how do you see Robert Griffin's career from now?
First, I want to issue a correction. Maybe they weren't roommates. Maybe they were just there and at Northwestern at the same time. Sorry, my brain this is one of the disadvantages of getting old. And this is also an opportunity for me to say I went to Syracuse. I went to the Newhouse School, and let's go Orange.
You went to the home of sports reporting. That's where you went.
I did, and I only stayed in there for a year and a half. I was in broadcast journalism. It was class of 97. I was in broadcast journalism for a year and a half, and I decided at least that path wasn't to me. So this is why I'm passionate about the democratization of the media, because it's something that gave me a backdoor into something. Anyway, Robert Griffin III. What's fascinating to me about this, and this gets into, we could talk about quarterback scouting and Jared Goff and Carson Wentz and Paxton Lynch and Cardell Jones and Connor Cook and so on. And I think we all understand that while it's very difficult to isolate what, in hindsight, we should be looking for, even when quarterbacks hit, we do understand that it's a mental, spiritual, emotional issue much more than things that are easy to discern physically, even though people will often build their scouting reports for quarterbacks around those things that are easier to discern.
I think just to interrupt you real quick before we get to actually Robert Griffin stuff, this reminds me of something, maybe it was Matt Waldman who said it, maybe it was someone else, but evaluators, professional, amateur, whatever, and not just in football, everywhere, tend to more highly weight things that they can easily evaluate.
Yeah.
And so the more difficult something is to evaluate, unconsciously and maybe consciously, the less that they're going to weight it in terms of the way that, for an individual trait, in terms of the value of the whole. For quarterbacks, there's not a lot of stuff that's super obvious. So arm strength, physical build, maybe if you're fast, that sort of thing.
This is why Carson Wentz, he's got some of the check some of the box on the NFL fetishes. You know, the athleticism, the size, the arm. He's a winner, and so on. I know that Eric Stoner has said that like, and the NFL loves easy evaluations. You know.
I think that's actually where I got from. Yeah, I think.
Yeah. So and then that's how it is with quarterbacks. So with RG3. Whatever you want to say about how Mike Shanahan, how the Shanahan clan made things a bit easier for him in his rookie year. Yeah, that was my nickname. I don't remember where I originally heard that, but I loved it, so I seized upon it. The Shanahan clan, and it was there. I mean, this isn't one of those cases where we're looking at a player that it just never. The engine never turned over. He was
right. Like we're not asking like, well, why didn't Joey Harrington?
No, he was magnificent. And I'm not even talking about just based on things like it was against the Vikings, wasn't it? That basically the walk-off run, and the bucket accuracy on the deep balls was eerie. If Aldrick Robinson could just put his arms out and basket catch some of those, what RG3 stats? Because remember, Pierre Garçon was hurt for a good part of that year. He didn't really have anybody, and he was a leader. He lit the spark. He had gotten hurt during that season and came back and was still an excellent quarterback. And it's easy to forget that they were dominating the Seattle Seahawks at the time that he got hurt in that playoff game. They were dominating them on both sides of the ball. Perhaps the story of the Seahawks during these last few years is different if Griffin doesn't get hurt in that game, or perhaps if Shanahan can see that he's not moving well and gets him out of that game. And Kirk Cousins, that could be part of the Kirk Cousins story, right?
It could, yeah.
And Cousins,
a lot of dominance.
And Cousins, and remember that season. If we go back to that season, Cousins came in at the very end of the Baltimore game, a game with the game hanging in the balance, and led them to the win. And then had a very nice game against Cleveland the following week. So Cousins was probably somebody they should have had some confidence in to be able to come in a relief role. So my point is that we have success in his past. And then what you see is a breakdown, and whether it's the physical breakdown that precedes the mental breakdown, I think it's the mental breakdown, the confidence, the total lack of confidence. Now,
it was a lack of confidence in what he was doing, as well as a mechanical lack of confidence in being able to do things like plant his knee. So there were multiple levels of confidence that certainly impacted him. He was making the wrong reads in ways that he hadn't his rookie year. I mean, he was throwing with phenomenal anticipation against a variety of defensive coordinators didn't know what to do. They threw everything at him, right? And he was reacting to occasionally very complex coverages exceedingly well. A lot of people say, they brought, half of the Baylor system over and it was a system things, defensive coordinators, and that didn't really seem to be the case. Because he was doing all the things that, a quarterback, and he was given a lot of latitude at the line of scrimmage. He was doing all the things that, quarterback traditionally does well. He wasn't confident in those things anymore. And he also wasn't confident in physically being able to plant and throw, and physically being able to move in the pocket, running, obviously. There's a lot of levels to.
He was a defeated player. When you watch those Washington games with RG3 after his rookie year, it was almost like a horror movie scene where you just knew at some point, the slasher was going to come in, and he was just being set up to be devoured. You could see it in his body language. You could see it in how he's playing, and this is where cue Matt Waldman saying, "Well, as they changed it." They did a lot of max protect and sent just two guys out in routes. And what happens when you do that? You're going to hold the ball for too long. You're going to take a ton of hits. And then that's going to send you into that death spiral that he went into. And I don't think Waldman, I don't want to speak for him, but I don't think he has a very high opinion of Mike Shanahan. So this is part of the story. This is part of the redemption story. Okay, I'm trying to tell a redemption story. I like redemption stories. I like the idea that people can change, that people can overcome difficulty. And I think we were all denied something whenever all the air went out of the RG3 balloon. So I am looking at Hugh Jackson as an optimist. He's an optimistic coach. And I think that is the story we need to tell here. It appears, reading from the outside, that when RG3 came into work out, you can imagine Hugh Jackson, like the classic cartoon character with his eyes popping out of his head, like, whoa, look what I have to work with here. Do you mean that I can just take these raw materials and build around that? Yes. Like, where do I sign up? And that's the energy that Griffin needs right now. This idea of truly a fresh start.
Well, so here's an interesting. So there's two questions I think that comes out of this, and I think the first question is why didn't that happen with the other former Cincinnati offensive coordinator, Jay Gruden? I think that's the first question. I think the second question is, so we've got optimism, we've got somebody who truly can buy into RG3, but also probably a front office that doesn't want to go all in on a quarterback they signed, on $6.75 million guaranteed on a 2-year deal, right? So they probably will get another quarterback. So how much of a chance does Griffin get to showcase, basically Hugh Jackson's coaching acumen when it comes to his comebacks? So those are the two questions.
Sure. So Jake, I can't say, what exactly happened with Jay Gruden, but at that point, Griffin was already damaged goods. And watching Kirk Cousins and watching Andy Dalton, you see some similarities where if you build enough structure around these quarterbacks and it works, like the plays as drawn up work, they're going to be like super backup quarterbacks. Because that's kind of how I define a backup quarterback. Like a backup level quarterback is if the play as drawn up works, they can execute the play and your offense will be able to leverage off of whatever it can do. Outside of that, they're not going to add much and you just hope that they don't hurt you.
Right. A backup the ideal backup quarterback is the one that goes into an already won game and doesn't lose it, I think.
Yeah, and I think that Kirk Cousins and Andy Dalton are like backups plus in the sense that you can take Jay Gruden, the common denominator there, and good personnel in both offenses, and be able to plug them into those plays, and they're going to confidently execute them, and you're going to be able to leverage that. So I would imagine that Cousins probably appealed to Gruden and Griffin as damaged goods. And who knows where Griffin was as far as just how tuned in he was. The well was poisoned at that point, I think. Just the way that the Washington fan base turned on him so viciously. And everybody was expecting failure at that point. Even now you see the jokes like Griffin's going to get hurt in his first game or something like that.
Right.
So that's a lot. That's a lot to carry. What kind of chance? Well, here's what's interesting, right? You would almost say that if you're rooting for Griffin, you would want him to have a redshirt year. Like, what would have been truly ideal for him, I think, would be to go someplace like Seattle, an organization where he could lick his wounds, and be part of a team and probably not see the field, at least not have pressure to see the field right away, and then build himself back up. I think some might say that if he has to play right away, then there's a chance that whatever has been built up in the offseason crumbles very quickly, like once the bullets are flying out there on the field.
So he needs to build a structure, and then he's got to let the paint dry.
Yeah. So it might be a bad thing that he, at this point, because Josh McCown, you would think, especially after this Colin Kaepernick, we have April 1st for Colin Kaepernick, and at least San Francisco's posture is that they're going to keep him. So if you take Kaepernick off the market, now you have Denver looking at Josh McCown as a potential trade, or Ryan Fitzpatrick as someone to sign. The Jets kind of have to make their decision. Things start to fall into place here. Either way, I don't think McCown's going to still be with the Browns. I think they will draft someone, maybe not in the first round, maybe in the second round. But again, invoking Seattle here, like what Seattle did. Well, let's throw a bunch of darts and see what sticks.
Yeah.
They signed Matt Flynn. They drafted Russell Wilson. They still had Tavares Jackson, who had experience with Darrell Bevel, as Vikings fans know. So you have hey, there's a story you can tell, and the other thing is you create competition, and I think that's always a positive. But at this point, I almost don't see a way that he's not the opening day starter, and that may be a bad thing. We have to see if his college teammate Josh Gordon is included. That's going to make a big difference.
That will be super interesting, just overall as a storyline, but also, it's Josh Gordon. I mean, he's been out of football for a while, but I mean, it's Josh Gordon. He was the best receiver the 1 year he played.
And again, you have these guys, redemption stories, second chances, third chances. I mean, I don't even know what Gordon would be up to. And then, of course, in the— and I would say this is so funny because oftentimes I'll say, feel sorry, if you want to talk about teams to feel sorry for the fan bases, the Vikings are on the list just because of disappointments, but really it's Browns fans and Lions fans to an extent. Because the Cleveland franchise is cursed. And that's the part where it's hard to really buy into the redemption story for Griffin, because he's in an environment where you plant flowers in the ground and they just wilt and turn black, So that's already happened to him. I don't know that you can get the green thumb in Cleveland. It's more the brown thumb. And I want to see it. I want to see it happen. I really want to see it happen, because he was a scintillating player, and not just with his physical tools, not just with his abilities, but with how he animated that team and how that team took on his personality. So I'll be rooting for it, and I think Hugh Jackson is the right guy for this job. If there's somebody in the NFL who can do this, it is Hugh Jackson. It might just be that nobody can.
Well, I mean, that's fair enough. Well, let's go from a cursed team to maybe the opposite. I don't want to say blessed, because they've made their own luck, but certainly a team that's kind of the top of the pile. The Patriots, they grabbed Martellus Bennett from Chicago. They've got second tight end. I know Albert Breer tweeted out that Bennett is the closest thing they've had at tight end to Aaron Hernandez since Aaron Hernandez, which I think is a little bit too simplistic, because they've basically replaced that position with like H-backs or halfbacks mostly and slot guys. But they got Martellus Bennett, who, like Gronkowski, has excelled both at blocking and receiving. Makes it a really interesting setup, I think, for New England. Like, what is your reaction to this?
Well, this is a team that always seems to have clarity. And this is really important, like organizational clarity from top to bottom, in the sense of this is how we win football games. Here's how we identify players that help us win football games. Here are the kinds of chances and risks we're willing to take. Here are the kinds of chances and risks we're not willing to take. So it's a very interesting offseason that we'll look back on and see if what we think the Patriots were thinking matches what happens, and whether they were right. In the case of Martellus Bennett, you have a locker room presence, a different personality. How can you not?
Yeah, different is a great way to put it. I really wanted him and his brother to be on the same team for a while, but oh well.
And this is definitely, we could get into the Black Unicorn origin story and so on. But I think this is a classic Patriots acquisition. They don't always work. Albert Hainsworth didn't work. Chad Ochocinco didn't work. But the idea being that their culture is so strong that they can bring in a handful of players who other teams might shy away from, because they have that culture that you adhere to or feel comfortable in. Maybe the structure you've been lacking, or just this idea of confidence, saying we know the baggage or whatever your reputation is, but we want you to be part of what we're doing. And if it doesn't work, what they give up, $5 million salary dropping from the 4th round to the 6th round, who cares?
Right.
If it works, now you have restoration to an offense, because we know that between the personnel they have as outside receivers and Tom Brady's accuracy outside just isn't great anymore. So whatever, work the middle of the field, and also you have in Gronkowski and Martellus Bennett basically 7 offensive linemen. Bennett is an excellent run blocker. So you have this multiple offense that defenses still haven't really figured out, as long as the offensive line's intact. That's what happened to Brady in the AFC title game. The offensive line was just a total sieve. So if it doesn't work out, what do they really lose? If it does work out, they're a lot better team than they were without Martellus Bennett. On the flip side, you have Chandler Jones.
That's a really good sort of alternate. I mean, this seems like a classic. New England's done this a lot. You can go all the way back to when they traded, Seymour to Oakland.
Oakland, right.
Selling high, right? I mean, this feels like they're selling Chandler Jones high.
Absolutely. And I think this could end up being a win-win, because a second-round pick, what's a second-round pick worth? I mean, they're looking at that as just another, and it is a late second-round pick.
Sometimes.
Sure, and and if you have enough of those shots, this is what's so fascinating about watching the Bill Belichick Patriots during the draft season. There's almost an understanding. We could almost look at it like a fantasy draft point of view, where there's an understanding of a realistic grasp of how frequently you're going to hit on your picks. So the answer to that is to get more picks. And generally they trade down, or generally they make these kinds of deals, so they just have more swings at the piñata to make some more candy fall out. And like you said, I mean, there's second round picks we barely even remember because they were so bad. Rozai Dowling, who they got for Carolina. I think that was the pick that turned out to be Armani Edwards. But then there's also Sebastian
Lessons
Ballmer.
from both sides, I see.
Yeah, exactly. That's one of those. That's one of those ones. When we look back at Marty Herney's reign, we'll remember some of those. Anyway, you see that idea that give us enough shots, and we'll hit a Jamie Collins. We'll hit on a Sebastian Vollmer, and these are players that the Patriots obviously you see them make draft picks that they have a board. I've heard that their board is a very, very small board.
I've heard that it can be smaller than 70 players. And, that's why they drafted a long snapper on the 5th round last year. Is that the board was actually done. They didn't have a draftable grade on him.
Right.
They had 5th round picks. So.
They go in there's only this many players that we're going to draft because they have that kind of clarity. So the clarity that comes in with Chandler Jones is this idea that now there was an incident this offseason, synthetic marijuana. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of bad incidents down here in Austin with synthetic marijuana too. Stay away from the synthetic marijuana, kids. He went into a police station, shirtless, surrendered himself, seemed to be freaked out. Now, I don't think the Patriots made the decision based on simply that one incident, but that incident coming up to this public level where we could see it maybe is an indicator of a larger misgivings that the Patriots had. And of course, everybody brings up that he's going into free agency and he's going to get paid. I mean, whatever.
Right. I think he's probably
paid.
Somebody that they wouldn't have been able to retain in free agency.
Or they just decided they don't want to. They paid Darrelle Revis, so it isn't like they won't pay anybody, but they just looked at it and said, we're not going to pay him $20 million a year or whatever. I mean, he's going to get – basically, a player like Chandler Jones is going to get whatever he wants in free agency. The players of his caliber don't hit free agency usually. So they know that if they're not going to – there's no reason for him to give them any sort of discount. We all know that under the new CBA, and you have to hit the second contract, get everything you can. The game doesn't care about you. The teams don't care about you. So – they say, we know we're not going to pay him a $100 million contract. Arizona, on the other hand, I mean, we could look back on this incident and whatever the Patriots were worried about. I mean, if Chandler Jones just plays like Chandler Jones, you put him on the other side of Calais Campbell, you also have an Arizona team that is in a win-now window. An Arizona team that, think about this. They gave up a late second-round pick. How much was that player going to contribute this year? Jonathan Cooper, a sub mediocre guard. Maybe the Patriots see something they can salvage there, and they add Chandler freaking Jones, one of the 10 best players of his type. This is a massive upgrade.
I think if you go over the Arizona Cardinals need list for the past only 2.5, 3 seasons, I think pass rusher has been sort of at the top of it. And that's our need list. Obviously, the Cardinals have kind of disagreed. They haven't drafted a first-round pass rusher, I think, in a while. So this certainly, I mean, there's fitting a need, and then there's fitting a need. And I think that this is along the second static.
It could end up being a true win-win trade because what the Patriots have now is a defense that you're generating pressure from guys like Dante Hightower, and you mentioned Jamie Collins already, Jabal Sheard, who they didn't get as much from, but this is a player I think that could step in and at least provide some of the pressure. And when you think of Patriots classic edge rushers, you don't think of quick twitch guys that are creating with bend and first step. You're thinking of hustle guys, Rob Ninkovich and Mike Vrabel. These hustle guys, these guys that are cleaning up messes and things like that. So they can make it work by generating pressure in other ways. And so this can be a classic win-win. But what I think is always so fascinating, and I'll just step back and make a larger point here as I go on, as I always do, is teams can't lie in the draft. Teams can't lie with their free agent signings or these trades. I mean, they're showing us. So the NFL is all about deception as we're getting into April, lying season. Mm-hmm. If we hear a piece of information, there's a reason. It's getting out. It's in somebody's interest, or somebody's trying to use the news cycle to their advantage. But when teams actually make these moves, they're telling us about their philosophy. They're telling us about what they value and what they don't value. They're telling us about their internal evaluations of their own players and other players. And the Patriots, you can always look at their moves and get a very clear idea of what they're doing. They're not a team that indicates, and the Vikings, I think, have done a good job with this too, where you see everybody pulling in the same direction. We might disagree with it, but it ends up much better off, speaking of those poor Browns, where you see organizations that it's clear that there's 2 or 3 different directions that forces are pulling, and that is a recipe for continued failure and continued turnover and lack of stability, and basically a rinse-repeat situation like they've gotten into. With the Patriots, it's just the opposite. You have everybody answering to Belichick, and you have this idea, again, like I was talking about with Rick Spielman, making moves with confidence. They knew they weren't going to be able to re-sign Chandler Jones. Logan Mankins is another trade they made recently like that. Mankins is now gone, not going to be back with Tampa. So you see those moves, and you see them being willing to, just like Bill Belichick going for it on 4th down before it was in vogue. Being willing to trust their internal machinations and not worrying about what will people say or what would other people do. And the success is undeniable.
Yeah, I think this is both for the Cardinals and for the Patriots. I think this really speaks to the importance of having a vision and sticking to it, which is something that we often don't see. In fact, I think that's been the Buccaneers. You mentioned them. I think that's been the biggest problem that they've had over the past couple of years, is that they haven't had a vision. They think they see an opportunity and they go for it, which is fine a lot of times, but they don't have the central guiding philosophy, which has led to a ton of overpaid free agent acquisitions, a ton of players that are good but don't fit their scheme, again and again and again.
And hiring your offensive coordinator because somebody interviewed him.
Yeah.
Your head coach. Well, seriously, I mean,
no, yeah,
you thought Dirk Cutter should be your head coach. Why did it take Miami potentially interviewing him? So that's another sign of, again, a lack of clarity.
Yeah. Well, let's shift to something that you read a lot about, which is fantasy strategy. I think probably actually the same advice: having a plan or a vision intact when you go into a draft, whether it's dynasty, even daily fantasy. Although that's you have time to figure stuff out in daily fantasy, or season long. How important to you first is having sort of that vision, and what would it take for you to depart from that kind of vision?
Right.
And second, what is your let's take season long right now. What is your ideal way to set up a season long draft for you in terms of the positions that you target and what positions you get where?
Well, coming in with a plan is important, and I write something called the master plan every year, and it gives you an idea of, it's kind of like a bunch of if-then statements. Here's a range that let's take the tight end position. If you draw a pick in the second half of the first round, you might look at Rob Gronkowski. If you don't draw a pick in that range, or if he just doesn't fall to you, then maybe you would look at Jordan Reed in the 4th round, or Greg Olsen or Tyler Eifert in the 5th round, and so on. And you can just keep going. Okay, if those don't work out for you, maybe you'll double up in the 10th and 11th round, because now you're taking a few shots and you're taking, say, Dwayne Allen and Martellus Bennett, who we just talked about, and seeing someone, So the point being, you have an idea of different points in your draft and decisions that you're going to make, but you're not going to be locked into, I have to get my tight end in this round or by this round, or it has to be one of these players, because if you're too rigid, you're going to miss what's happening in your draft. And it's the people who can be flexible and understand. Auction drafts are really great for this too, because no 2 auction drafts are the same. Right. So being able to ascertain up front, if you see that run of running backs early, then you know that you're going to zig when everyone's zagging. You're going to take 2 wide receivers at the turn, and you can understand how to not get caught up in the panic. But then also there are times, so there's no hard and fast rules. I mean, there are times that, hey, the train's
where sometimes you need to respond to a run.
Exactly. You're going to be left out in the cold. Yeah. So you have to be flexible. So understanding, and that's where research come in, subscribing to footballguys.com, or really there's so much great stuff out there, just being prepared. And it's that same idea of preparation giving you that calm so that you are seeing things in the moment and not worried about. There's nothing better in a fantasy draft whenever people are starting to freak out and go on tilt. and you make your pick in like 3 seconds, and it's just like it gets under people. Like you feel like people are like, I never expected the draft to go like this, and your picks are just submit this confident. Now, my personal philosophy, I don't really care. I mean, you do need an elite running back. This year, Todd Gurley and Le'Veon Bell are going to go off the board very quickly. And then you get into some dicier territory. Do you believe in Adrian Peterson to keep the level up? Right. Is Jerick McKinnon going to do more this year, coming out of that trend that was coming on late last year? How's Jamal Charles going to come back from his ACL? I like Ezekiel Elliott. I think that he's going to hit the ground running no matter what team he's on, no matter who's in his way at the beginning of the season. So you need one running back. But I don't
let's talk that real quick. The idea of having an elite running back, I think, has become more important in the fantasy community as it's become less important in the NFL community, because as resources become scarcer, they become more valuable, and there's fewer elite running backs. So, what happens if, let's say, the elite, the people that will be elite, like Le'Veon Bell, they're gone, right? The people that you've, based on your analysis, you're kind of betting, could be like Doug Martin, right? Like you're like, well, I believe in his situation, I believe in his talent, and I believe in what happened in his offense. So that's but I don't believe, like, say, Jamal Charles based on my research, right? So the guys that are going to be good are gone. The guys that you're confident have a good chance of being like an RB1 are gone. That's probably true for half of the people drafting in a lot of leagues. What do you do? Do you just go all in on wide receiver? You're like, hey, I know Eric Decker is going to be super undervalued later, so I'm going to stash him away for later. I know that, Des Bryant's coming back, so I'm going to get Des Bryant now. I'm going to make sure that I get Eric Decker, in round 4, and then in round 5, I got to make sure that I get one of these rookies that I really like. Like, what do you do in that situation?
So I think the important thing here is, as your draft is going along, you can understand what your weakness is going to be and start to pare down your list of targets later. So if you merge out of the first 4 or 5 rounds with no running back, then you narrow your focus in the later rounds for maybe somebody like Matt Jones, who, whether you believe him or not, he's going to get the opportunity for Washington.
Right. So you take a lot of shots. So like Melvin Gordon,
exactly.
Maybe you don't believe in him, but
right.
Really good chance he could take
or even some sneaky veteran types like Frank Gore or Justin Forsett or Rashad Jennings. These are guys available in the 9th, 10th round or later that we're all wanting to push them out the door. But the reality is, at this moment, they're the best running back on their rosters, and they've demonstrated the ability to be a lead back for their team, for the team they're on right now. So you're almost saying, until I see strong evidence in the other direction, you're betting on status quo. So you can, and then even later on, you can take.
Do you take a bunch of shots at that?
Yeah,
like
exactly.
Say, hey, well, here's
taking. Go ahead.
Okay, so and maybe you could diversify the kind of shots. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if, for example, Derrick Henry drops further than he should based off of his real world draft position. So you could be like, hey, here's a rookie that's in a good spot. Derrick Henry, he's undervalued. Maybe he'll be able to take advantage of what's happening. Here's 2 veterans, say Forsett and Gore,
right.
And then here's a guy that when he's been on the field, he's been good. The road has been cleared for him, for whatever reason. And for some reason the team, hasn't invested in the position. So I don't know, maybe Thomas Rawls. And so you got veterans that people try to push out the door, rookies that people don't believe in, and guys maybe somewhere in between that maybe have opportunity but haven't shown you, the kind of consistency. So you take a bunch of shots.
Yeah.
As opposed to just ignoring the position.
You can take a bunch of shots too, because, if you've made it through the first 5 rounds without a running back, you're going to be really strong at wide receiver. You're probably going to have one of the top tight ends. You might have taken a quarterback, but this year I don't think you even need to take a quarterback in the first 5 rounds, and you could probably still get. I say that, but local leagues, quote unquote local leagues, quarterbacks will still go early. The quarterback is a position that you can ignore in fantasy drafts early on. Mm. So your wide receivers, maybe you started out your draft like Gronk and then 4 wide receivers in a row, or 3 wide receivers in a row, and then Tyler Eifert, another wide receiver. So you're stacked. You don't even really need to worry about your bench at wide receiver. Maybe you take another tight end later because of Eifert's injury history. So yeah, you're going to take a lot of shots. I know that some people have called this a zero running back strategy. Paul Charchian did it a while back. It was called Do the Opposite. There you go. I'm dropping charts. There you go.
Yeah.
And Matt Waldman called it upside down drafting. Basically, this idea going back to when there were a lot more stud running backs that you would go running, but this good old stud running back, it's like missionary position or something. Just this is what we this was the way it was back when things were simple. This is something that we've now moved away from because, as you led this off with, the idea that teams aren't relying on one running back. So back then they would say, well, everybody's taking running back early, so you don't take running back early. Take those sure things at wide receiver that are there instead, and then you take a lot of these kinds of shots. And what we also see helping out here is the injury rate at running back. So again, you almost maybe just want to take players where you can tell yourself a story that they end up being really valuable. Kristen Michael, if he's backing up Thomas Rawls.
Right.
You
steal other people's handcuffs, basically.
Yeah, D'Angelo Williams, James Starks. These are the kinds of players that you're going to, and maybe after 2-3 weeks you'll drop them for somebody else who's come on, and you're going to be really aggressive on the waiver wire. You waited all year last year until somebody dropped David Johnson, and you snatched him up just because you knew if he got a chance. And this is a lot of what we do on our podcast and our work when we do our waiver wire stuff. It's basically saying not so much what's the percentage of the chance this player hits, but if they hit, how big could they hit? And if you start thinking about it that way, you can compensate and really you can checkmate your opponents, right? Because if you have the wide receivers, if you started out your draft like Odell Beckham and Alshon Jeffrey and Jarvis Landry, and then you took Jordan Reed in the 4th round, and you took Cam Newton in the 5th round, that's where he's going in MFL 10s. So, I knew he's going to go a lot earlier in the drafts. And early MFL 10s, quarterbacks are falling really far. So then if you hit on those running backs, checkmate. What are they going to do? How are they going to stop you? So I think it's a very viable way to go about it. And it's and just to put a punctuation mark on this, like my own personal philosophy, I want to draft a team that if my draft plan works out, it will make the league not fun for everybody else to play in. They'll just how can I? Now the reality is things change so quickly during a fantasy football season that the number one team, like in week 10, gets knocked out of the playoffs in the first round because it's staying on top of things. It's knowing in those weekly lineup decisions who's hot, what units are hot, what individual players are coming on, and that's why I hope it's rewarding for people, because if you can just sneak into the playoffs, you can still win your championship. It isn't just about total points.
Anything is possible.
Anything is possible. As a fan of my Syracuse Orange, I can say that. Yes, we learned that this week.
True. That's true. Man, what's it like to be this far in a tournament you're not supposed to be in?
It's fun. Sorry, America.
All right. Dusty keeps telling me we're crunched for time, and I want to get to Viking stuff. But I got one more question about fantasy before we hit the mailbag, and we'll start the mailbag with a Vikings-related fantasy question so that we can pivot a little bit. But the last question I want to ask about fantasy is, if you know how trade-friendly your league is, does that change your draft strategy significantly? So you could load up on you see this quarterback falling. You've already got your quarterback. Another quarterback. Let's say it's Tony Romo, right? Like, do you ignore a position of quote unquote need, like you just don't have a tight end, right? In order to take someone who's massively undervalued or just hasn't been drafted yet for whatever reason, if you know that you're in a trade-friendly league, does that change your drafting strategy a lot?
Sure, you should. You should be taking this into account anyway. And even if you're on a trade-friendly league, you can will it into being a trade-friendly league by playing the game, right? We all play fantasy football because we want to pretend we're a GM. So if you want to pretend you're a GM, what do? You cultivate relationships. You learn each other owners in your league's style of trading. Like some people like to just get right down to business and get to your best offer right away. Some people like to do the mating dance and go back and forth and counter. Or otherwise, like you try to make win-win trades, look at their roster, see what they need, see where your surplus is, and actually make a trade that will be attractive to them. So absolutely, you should not. I really disagree with the idea of going into your draft like I have to. It's 7 or 8 rounds in. I haven't taken a tight end yet. I have to take a tight end next because I haven't taken one, or just checking off the starting positions. Like I still haven't taken one of my starting positions yet, because you're not stuck with the team you drafted. Especially if you have waivers before the season starts, You can even start making moves before the season starts, picking up someone like Dion Lewis.
Like preseason in NFL news,
Yeah. Dion Lewis was somebody I think that wasn't getting drafted at all in early August. By late August, he was. So if your draft was a little bit earlier, those early runs can help you. And the idea that you're going to have the 20 players or 18 players, 16 players you picked, and you have to act as if that's the players, those are the rosters you're going to have all season, I think can force you into bad picks. And you will, like you said, whoever the player is, if you think a player is going to hit, it doesn't matter if it's the 7th running back on your roster. If you like any one of these rookies, CJ Precise or Devontae Booker, or whoever, Alex Collins and Jonathan Williams. There's a lot of second-tier running backs that will say, so going back to the discussion of the kind of running backs you look at whenever you're trying to make up for not taking position early, like we're just going to look at situations, right? Like Washington, I mentioned, Chicago, Miami, even Denver to an extent, just because of C.J. Anderson's injury history. We're going to have certain situations where we're going to say any rookie running back that gets drafted there, we're going to be interested in, because we feel like there's an inherent instability there that, like David Johnson last year, but there's an inherent instability there that at some point there could hit a tipping point and that player could get a chance. And then we see how quickly it changes in the NFL. Like, it can all change in 1 week, one drive, one play even, where teams had one plan and then all of a sudden that plan changes. So I do think that we're going to watch those situations during the draft. We're going to watch those situations through the preseason, and being able to be a step ahead of everybody else, right? The classic Wayne Gretzky skating to where the puck is going to be.
Right.
I think that is one of the hallmarks of a consistent winning fantasy football owner.
All right. Well, I think we can go directly into the mailbag, talk about the Vikings wide receiver core. This is normally when Dusty takes over. Sometimes he has his microphone muted so he doesn't take over right away.
Not
Dusty,
this time.
are you there?
I am so here.
Oh, fantastic.
That's professional production right there, having all the buttons lined up correctly.
Oh, awesome.
All right.
Good to know that we're still in it.
So Tommy Gunn at Tommy the Gun 13, is he our official question asker?
He's our official question asker.
Okay. He leads off the mailbag with the question, how terrible is the Vikings wide receiver core for fantasy purposes?
Yeah, it's pretty terrible. I mean, it's really, like, you might want to say, so we do this with running backs. Like, sometimes there are backfields. Like, why would you even want to take a running back? Like last year, San Francisco might be better this year, but why would you want to take a running back for that team? Just tell me a story where any running back is going to be successful consistently, and that's the Vikings passing game. Because as we talked about earlier, they want a boring game, and whatever Teddy Bridgewater can do, whatever these receivers can do, you're still going to see a decent amount of Jarius Wright. You're still going to, obviously, Stephon Diggs is going to be the leading receiver on the team, but on a week-to-week basis, are you going to be able to count on him? It looked like that a little bit at first, and then he faded back. I would expect we're going to see a rookie in first 2 or 3 rounds are going to draft a wide receiver. That player is going to be in the mix. And then you have Kyle Rudolph. And Kyle Rudolph, if this offensive line overhaul works, maybe you get a little bit more for that big extension they signed him to. And he fits a conservative passing game. So week to week, the leading receiver could change. And it's going to be divvying up 23, 25 pass attempts.
So it's not just a question of like pass production or the amount of talent on the roster, although currently without the draft there are a lot of questions about talent on the roster. It's that because the Vikings pass so infrequently, there's not only going to be lower volume but higher variance. So
and the variance is kind of built in because they don't have a true number one receiver. Right. So yeah, the pie is smaller to begin with because you have a low number of attempts and less risky attempts. This is not a passing game that is going to have 23, 25 attempts, but like 5 or 6 of those are going to be shot plays downfield or something like that. It's going to be very conservative. So it's
how much do you react to when coaches in like press conferences in the offseason? I mean, it's March, right? But Mike Zimmer said in March that he wants Teddy to be more explosive and that he wants Teddy to take over the offense, and that they're going to they didn't say this, but sort of almost in between the lines, almost in text, they basically said they want to orient themselves more, not entirely, but more around a passing game. So in March, before the draft, just after free agency in March, when you hear a coach saying something like that, do you just tune it out, or do you think, well, maybe I can move Stephon Diggs up a little bit because it sounds like they care about this aspect of the game?
Well, you're open to it, right? So if we start to hear things from OTAs, we start to see things coming out of training camp, and we start to see things in preseason games that show us that, then we might be more
basically
open to it.
Basically, it primes you to that kind of news instead of changing.
Yeah, that's what all the off-season news. So you don't want to overreact to off-season news, but you also don't want to feel free to just ignore it because it massages your brain so that in those first couple of weeks when the dust is still settling, and we're seeing how this is going, you can maybe act with more confidence. And you can see, like, for instance, again, I'm going to go back to Dion Lewis, right? Because this was a player that they signed as kind of an afterthought. There was a point that it looked like Dion Lewis was going to break through with the Browns. Then he got hurt. But we knew that Lewis was a talented player. And we especially knew that for a Kevin Falk kind of role, he had a skill set going back to Pitt that looked like it could translate. Then you saw 2-3 weeks into the preseason, the Patriots beat writers just basically calling the whole running back situation, like saying that Lewis is won, definitively saying that. So you were then, when he went out in the first game and looked fantastic, you were ready to act confidently and you didn't need to wait. If you wait until you see 2 or 3 weeks of evidence, it's too late. And you're not always right when you make these early calls, but you have to be willing to do that. So you're paying attention to that stuff. Now, but going back to what you were saying about Zimmer, I will say this, and I'll go refer back to Bob Harris. And I was mentioning David Dodds and Joe Bryant. Bob Harris is one of the guys that taught people like Joe and David back in the early days of the Wild West of the internet. So anyway, Bob Harris would say that coaches don't usually tell the truth, but if they tell the truth, it's most likely to be in February at the Combine. Now, of course, that was when Norv Turner said that Charles Johnson is clearly the best wide receiver. Don't know what happened there. Don't happen between the Combine and the season.
Literally, no one knows what happened there. I mean, I think they believed it on September 1st.
Yeah. So he was telling the truth, and just whatever happened, whatever the bottom fell out. So I do think that we can sometimes look back, but the main thing is just having that range of possibilities. And the reality is the range of possibilities is always much larger than we think it is. We spent all offseason staring at this stuff and thinking, again, with numbers, we can narrow down the range of possibilities. Then they start to actually play football, and we see that really everything is on the table the whole time, and being open to that is how, when Odell Beckham takes the field and looks as good as he does, you say, well, I don't care what other rookie wide receivers who've missed all of preseason and the first 4 games have done. I know that this is different.
All right. So, Dusty, I don't know if your microphone's muted again.
No, I'm still here.
Okay, well, you need to continue doing the mailbag. I'm so bad at the transitions between mailbag questions. I need a show.
It's okay. You need a trained professional at something other than football to operate.
Implying I'm a trained football professional.
Well, you're professional. I mean, you do get money. Anyway, besides the point. Mitch Carlson writes in with a very interesting and oddly specific question.
It's very specific. I don't know if podcast-specific questions. Maybe, whatever. Go ahead, Mitch.
Okay. Pick 3 of these 4 for a keeper league with the corresponding round loss. Odell Beckham Jr., first-round pick. Julio Jones, first-round pick. Todd Gurley, 5th-round pick. And A-Rob, 7th-round pick. With the caveat, if Mitch keeps both OBJ and Julio, he loses his 1st and 2nd-round pick.
Instead of 2 imaginary first-rounders. Yeah. That makes sense. Yeah.
So I'll go on a little riff here about choosing your keepers. I can generalize this. This is what I do. So first of all of you out there in keeper leagues, a few things to keep in mind. And I actually went back and forth with Mitch on Twitter because to anticipate this question being asked, you're always asking a few more questions. One is, how long can you keep players? Can you keep players forever? Can you only keep them for a certain number of years? And then the next question would be, does the cost go up every year? So this gives you an idea.
That's the next question because a lot of keeper leagues have the cost move up by rent.
So you understand, like it's almost like a contract they're signed to. And there are tremendous salary cap contract leagues that I really enjoy. that make it
Reality
more
Sports
explicit.
Online has some phenomenal.
Yeah,
salary
definitely.
fees.
It's if you want to dip your toe in that water, Reality Sports Online is fantastic. So, and the other thing you need to keep in mind is, so he expresses this correctly. Beckham cost a first, Julio cost a first, Todd Gurley cost a fifth. But if it's a 3-keeper league, then a first round pick is really like a 4th round pick. So you should be adding, when you're thinking about what you're actually weighing, you're not weighing a true first round pick if you give up.
Right, it's not like a redraft first round pick.
No, it's like a 4th round pick because 3 rounds of players have been skimmed off the top. Now maybe it isn't the top 36 players, but certainly it's probably
but you're not going to find
30 of the 30.
Le'Veon Bell or Rob Gronkowski in that first round.
Right. So that makes it a little bit easier. And also, I had to ask about scoring. Scoring is important. Know your scoring in lineups. This was a non-PPR league. Gurley's a no-brainer no matter how you look at it. Gurley's going to be a top 5 or 7 pick in every draft. And keeping him to 5th round is a no-brainer. You have let's just say you're going to keep one of Beckham and Julio Jones because you're looking at, they're both excellent values for what would be equivalent to a 4th round pick. Again, even in a non-PPR league, you're looking at them as easy first round picks. The last part of this question would be, do you keep Allen Robinson for a 7th round pick, really a 10th round pick, or do you keep Julio Jones for a 4th round pick? And even though Allen Robinson might go in the early 2nd round or late 1st, and Julio Jones might go in the early 1st round or mid 1st, it's only a difference of, say, a half a round in picks, and you're looking at the gap from the 4th round to the 10th round. That seems like a pretty big gap. I would still keep the best player. Because,
really?
Yeah.
You'd rather keep... Wow, that's interesting.
So,
I would have picked him up instantly.
So, but here's the thing. I mean, Julio Jones, we know, is going to dominate his offense. Julio Jones, we know, is going to
taking all of his targets.
Right. Whereas Allen Robinson was good, but I think some of Allen Robinson's production was based on Jacksonville's game scripts, which could be repeated. Just a lot of comeback football in the second half, a lot of really big games. And I just think that, okay, so we really start to run this simulation, like it'd be like Allen Robinson, and who would be a 4th round pick in this scenario? Well, I suppose with rookies, maybe you'd be giving up depending on your draft position, like Ezekiel Elliott. And at that point, I'd say, okay, you would take Allen Robinson and Ezekiel Elliott. If let's say Ezekiel Elliott's not there, and then you're looking at something more like Carlos Hyde or Matt Forte, like a 4th round running back. So you can have Allen Robinson and Carlos Hyde, or you can have Julio Jones and a 10th round running back might be Frank Gore or Arian Foster. And I mean, Matt Forte and C.J. Anderson and Carlos Hyde just aren't that compelling to me. I'd rather just take my chances with whoever that later running back would be because I want to lock down the best possible players. So I would go with Julio Jones here. And I'm not saying that Allen Robinson would be the wrong move, but what I really want to get at here, more than Mitch's specific quandary, is a way to think about your keepers. And another thing that you could
that was interesting. Okay.
So another thing you can look at here too is you can package. So if somebody else only had like 2 keepers that they were interested in, but maybe one of those keepers was Le'Veon Bell, let's say for the cost of a 3rd round pick or something like that, then you could package up 2 of your keepers and get a better 3rd keeper, because what you have here is 4 very attractive keepers, and you need to find somebody in your league that only has 2, but maybe one of the 2 they have is worth even more. I mean, David Johnson for a 10th round pick or something like that.
Right.
See what you can find out there when you are this well endowed in keepers.
Endowed. All right.
My name is Sigmund. Sometimes a cigar is just a cigar.
Critical Role at Jesse _Silva writes us, what is Lamar Miller's upside in Houston?
Very high. This is a team that has been top 5 in rush attempts the last 2 years. Lamar Miller's a player I think we all can see. We should at least have been able to see what he can do with 20 touches a game. We know he has big playability. We know he's a great receiver out of the backfield. There's a lot of tread left on the tires. So I'm seeing in early drafts Lamar Miller going in the late 2nd round after players like David Johnson. And I like Devontae Freeman a lot, but we talked about Shanaclan. Kyle Shanahan's going to give Tevin. I mean, they're going to try to make Tevin Coleman happen. Is that something that will dissipate after a few weeks and Devontae Freeman will go back to being really the centerpiece of the offense other than Julio Jones. Maybe, but you have uncertainty here. You have uncertainty with Adrian Peterson in the direction.
Is this specifically about Shanahan? Is this a result of the fact that they invested a second-round pick, like your hesitation, a second-round pick in Tevin Coleman, or that the Shanahans have been notorious for being difficult to predict when it comes to running backs? Shanahanigans, if you will.
Yeah, sure. Well, I think that some of it is that they invested that high pick in Coleman. I was somewhat impressed with the way that Coleman seemed to ratchet up a few of the things that I saw that were problematic at Indiana. Mm-hmm. And I also just think that, this is a player that the idea is you use him frequently because you want that 70-yard touchdown run. So you don't just mix him in, you get him in a rhythm, and you hope that those long touchdown runs will come. So I just think you're going to see Tevin Coleman. They're going to try. I mean, the best way I could put it is they're going to try to make Tevin Coleman happen. Adrian Peterson, we're not totally sure about the trend there. As Jerick McKinnon, again, at the end of the year showed that he should be used more in this backfield. Even Jamal Charles, at this late juncture of his career with another ACL, I would love for Jamal Charles to do what I probably think he's going to do and come back and just be Jamal Charles again. What I'm getting at here is the proposition to me of Lamar Miller at the end of the second round or beginning of the third round versus Adrian Peterson at the beginning of the second round. I'd rather take Lamar Miller. So I think Lamar Miller is another one of these running backs that you should target that we could look back on and say, of course he was going to be a top 5 pick. You have a young player on the upside of his career with a massive opportunity, team with a great defense that's going to keep games on run-heavy game scripts. We don't really know what somebody that isn't Alfred Blue can do. I would say that Lamar Miller is a player that could be a league winner if he stays healthy under the heavy workload he's going to get.
Another question from Jesse. Is Le'Veon Bell the presumptive number 1 pick?
Or, hold on, let me add to this.
Yeah.
Or is it Rob Gronkowski?
Right. Well, you can make a case for Bell. You can make a case for Gronkowski. You can make a case for Antonio Brown. I think any of them are fine. I will say this. If you take Le'Veon Bell, you have to take D'Angelo Williams a few rounds before his ADP. So right now, that's probably 13th, 14th round. As long as you get D'Angelo Williams, you're protecting your investment there. Because what we saw is, whether it was Le'Veon Bell or D'Angelo Williams, the Steelers running back was the number 1 fantasy running back. It didn't matter who it was. Bell obviously offered more as a receiver out of the backfield, but D'Angelo Williams showed more than we remember him having in that area in Carolina. So the offense is going to set up the running back to be the stud running back in the NFL. So just make sure you corner that position, the Steelers running back, and you'll be fine there. I'm fine with Gronk. I think that's just one of those tone setters for your team, and Martellus Bennett's not going to hurt his production. Scott Chandler, he was catching touchdowns somewhat frequently too. And then Antonio Brown. And Antonio Brown might be the easiest one in a PPR league because here you have a player he's playing at a Hall of Fame level right now. And there's no sign he's going to slow down with Martavis Bryant suspended.
Antonio Brown also offers, so this is something that people don't tend to talk a lot about when it comes to fantasy, is certainty. A lot of people have projections. Right. A lot of people don't have projection ranges. And the thing about Antonio Brown is that I don't know if there's a more certain player of his floor anyway. I mean, his floor is really high too.
His floor is higher than most players' ceilings. That's the thing. Right. He's been putting numbers up that are unheard of. The last 3 years of Antonio Brown, I will put next to 3 consecutive years of any wide receiver in NFL history.
This sounds like you're building off of an argument that you've had with a bunch of people about how good Antonio Brown is. Well, you'll get no argument. He's the best receiver in the NFL right now. I love Julio. I love Dez. AJ's all right. Antonio Brown's the best receiver in the NFL.
Nobody can cover him. I mean, they cannot cover him. And it's like Odell Beckham, but he's staying healthy basically. And he's a player that unlike Odell Beckham, like there's no key to unlock, like to get in his head or something like that. We'll see about how that goes with Beckham. But this is the best you will ever see a wide receiver play in the NFL at this level. So you're getting a chance to catch that wave when you take Antonio Brown. When I've been drawing the number 1 pick in drafts, I've been taking Antonio Brown.
That's interesting. And do you only play PPR leagues?
Well, that's the trend right now. MFL 10s are PPR leagues. In general, a lot of the dynasty leagues are PPR leagues. If you're going back to non-PPR leagues, though, I think in non-PPR leagues, honestly, there's an argument for Todd Gurley. Because we don't know how good we could all look back and say how did we not see that Todd Gurley was the number one pick? Because we don't know how good he could be. But this was coming off of less than a year removed from an ACL last year, and he was spectacular. And I think you're going to see him get better. I'm just not sure how much better. And it's one of those questions. It's going to be fun to see the answer when he's on your roster.
All right, Dusty, if we could pivot to the 2 Vikings-specific questions, just so we can end on a Vikings note.
Okay, well, there's a third part to Jesse's question that I think is moderately
Jesse asks questions all the time, though.
That's true, but we're doing okay on time thanks to my aggressive management of the show, and this is an interesting question, especially in light of the discussion we had earlier about trying to take shots at running back, and the question is,
that's what the show's really about: shots.
I thought it was about takes.
It's about takes too.
Taking shots? No. Where should Thomas Rawls be drafted?
He's going mid-second, late-second, maybe early third. Maybe a little bit high for me. Again, like in that same range, I would take Lamar Miller. I do think, well, first of all, because Thomas Rawls was one of my guys, for sure. Watching him at Central Michigan, learning his story. And this is one of the great things about Twitter, right? Talking to his mama about how he was really contrite. Well, because you see that players' families are scanning Twitter, searching for them, and talking to analysts that are talking about. They're you know what I'm talking about. It's not always positive. So you saw a player who just wanted a chance. He just wanted to get into a camp and have a chance. The gratitude, just to have an opportunity after his career went south after an incident, like a purse incident, stealing a purse or something like that. And he ran hot. He and Kristen Michael actually have very similar running styles. So
yeah, that's not a positive for a lot of people.
No.
Well, okay, so I think the difference, if you wanted to talk about the running styles, I think the difference is that they both love to run at Walls, but I think Thomas Rawls finds the door.
Yeah. Well, Kristen Michael, it's almost like it's an accident when he does. And Rawls, right. I think Rawls definitely has better vision and anticipation than Michael. But so yeah, you saw maybe even a little bit more clearly defined, disciplined version of that. But Michael came on at the end of the year, finally. And with Rawls and this ankle injury, at least early on, you're hearing the Seahawks project, well, he'll be back for the beginning of the season, maybe not the beginning of camp, which shows you, I don't believe he had surgery on his ankle. So, that's
fantastic news.
But at the same time, if it's an injury that could sideline him 9 months after the injury, you wonder. And certainly there have been times, Sidney Rice, right?
Yeah, I was just thinking about Sidney Rice when I said fantastic news.
Exactly, where players can say opt to not have surgery, and then once they try to get back on the field in the summer, say, ooh, I should have had surgery. So that's another reason that I might, at this early juncture, not take Rawls that high. But I do want to say that it's been lost in the mix that he had a monumental season for a rookie.
I think DFS players know this. Yeah.
Well, just to average was over 5.5 yards a carry, right? And not on an insignificant number of carries either. He did it on 147 carries, averaging 5.6 yards behind an offensive line that up to that point we would say, oh, disaster.
They had to replace their center for talent reasons partway through, I think, Rawls' run.
Right.
The center.
And he was spectacular. So I don't want to take anything away from that. And I could look back on this spot, and I was saying, I don't know about Thomas Rawls in late second. If he just does what he did last year, he's worth a first-round pick. So I'm not going to talk anybody out of taking him that early.
All right. Well, so before we get to another question, talking about Christine Michael and how it took so long for him to produce in a way that I think satisfied everyone's curiosity and desire about him. I know that the Audibles don't like Cecil Lammey, right? He's based out of the Denver area, I think. What's up with Cody Latimer? Is that done? Are we done with Cody Latimer?
No, we're not. we're not really done. Okay, so Cody Latimer.
I'm super interested now.
Yeah. So with the story on Cody Latimer, because I loved, I thought like Cody Latimer is the player people want Jordan Matthews to be. I mean, uber athletic, tremendous ball skills, blocking, and a player that I saw as.
You can't say blocking. That's like crack for people.
Yeah,
right. Blocking.
That's Sterling Shepard this year. Watch Sterling Shepard do some blocking. He's like
we've already had Matt Harmon on the show. We've
yeah. So you got Harmon and I share our affinity for Sterling Shepard's game, and also the Tyler Boyd take. Also, we talk on the phone, and it's good. It's good to know you're not alone. But Cody Latimer. So you had a couple of problems here. He admitted himself that he maybe took it a little too easy in his rookie year. And this is one of the things about the draft, why the draft is so inexact. I don't even think the players themselves know how they'll respond to, as Trent Richardson was saying, it's easy to get lazy in the NFL. There's a lot of structure in college programs. You go to the NFL, it's kind of up to you. And no one's going to tell you, no one's going to be there if you let yourself go, you squander your opportunity. I think that Cody Latimer, by his own admission, didn't have the approach and dedication in his rookie year that he should have. And then in the second year, you get to the Peyton Manning factor. And look, this is the thing with the Peyton Manning offense. If you don't have his confidence, you're not going to get on the field. It's not going to happen. And that was what happened. And I think that to hear Cecil tell it, Peyton Manning, for people that don't know, Peyton Manning is a really hard person to work with.
I thought you were going to say asshole. Yeah,
he's a really hard person to work with. And if you're a young player with a little bit shaky confidence, then it can be nerve-wracking. Like you can just think, don't make a mistake, don't make a mistake, don't make a mistake, don't make a mistake. That's no way to play professional football. You could see it in Latimer's game. You could see that he was playing without confidence. Now, when Brock Osweiler was in, who he'd been playing with and practicing with, you saw more of the Latimer that we hoped we would see in the NFL. I don't know who's going to be playing quarterback for Denver. And that's definitely something that forget about Latimer. Like this year you're worried about Demaryius Thomas, you're worried about Emmanuel Sanders. For dynasty leagues, I would not be giving up on Cody Latimer because Peyton Manning has moved on.
That's such an interesting. I mean, and I'm not saying the way that you thought through the process is wrong, but when you go from A to whatever D, right, and we skip B and C, it sounds hilarious to say, well, now that Peyton Manning's gone, Cody Latimer has a chance.
Well, sure. Well, you have a
chance
quarterback
to be named as the quarterback,
right? Well, it's just because the confidence. If there's one thing to explain, so there's two things we think we know by players are busts, especially when we watch tape on college tape. We're like, well, he was lacking this, or you could see that this was going to be a problem. But most of the time, in the NFL, failure is a taboo subject. Okay, so we don't have a lot of good postmortems on players that fail and why they fail. That's why it's really great that Trent Richardson article came out, even if it's a bit skewed from being his own perspective instead of some objective outside perspective.
I mean, that offers us something that, as even skewed, is unique information.
Yeah, because it's a taboo subject, but oftentimes it's dedication and it's confidence and a loss. And we talked about this with RG3. I mean, it can be fatal. When Peyton Manning saps your confidence, you're not going to get it back as long as he's in the organization.
Well, Dusty should be happy to hear that. I'm not going to say a closet Denver fan, but it's like it's his second team. So sorry, Sigmund. I know
that's fine.
I know you grew up hating Denver, but that's surprise. Your host is also a Denver fan.
I know. I was trying to be polite about it, but I was definitely just outed. Especially now that they've won a Super Bowl, I am a Broncos enthusiast. Where's that bandwagon at? Let me get on there.
This is the saddest bandwagon Super Bowl of all time.
I know. I'm going to be on it, and none of the players that won the Super Bowl other than Von Miller.
That's going to be a fun wagon to be on then.
Oh my gosh. I am looking forward to how quickly sports talk radio makes me want to drive off a bridge. I'm gonna give it about 5 minutes.
Yeah, and I could make a joke about Minneapolis and driving off of bridges, but that's a very serious subject.
Okay, I was in college when that happened. I think it's not too soon.
I started winning over the audience, and then I just lost it.
It's not too soon. It's just uncalled for. Well, we do have a couple of Vikings-related questions that I guess, I mean, even though I said I didn't want to address any draft stuff in this show, I suppose we should, just to make this ostensibly a Vikings podcast.
Throw some chum in the water.
Ironleaf at IronleafSH writes us, which of the newly acquired offensive linemen from last year have the best shot to make it?
So I think he means like, does he mean like Zach Kieran and TJ Clemmings and like those guys? Or does he mean like from this year, like Alex Boone and what's the name of the right tackle? Oh my God, I'm blanking. The
Andre Smith.
Giant guy, Andre Smith.
Well, I think if you include Alex
tackle.
Boone and Andre Smith, then it becomes a conversation about them. So let's go with the former.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Well, I am so curious about this because, as has been pointed out kind of endlessly, right? The Vikings have 9 players in the roster that have started 16 games. That is a full depth chart. You bring 9 or 10 players with you into the 90, or into the 53. So you're looking at players like Nick Easton. I think Michael Harris was in. No, he wasn't. Sorry. So I can't even pick Mike Harris. It's so sad. So Zach Kieran. Kind of. He was on a practice squad 2 years ago. Now he's on the roster. Nick Easton traded. Jeremiah Searles traded. TJ Clemmings drafted. Tyrus Thompson gone. He was the guy that I liked, so go me. And then Carter Bykowski signed off of San Francisco's practice squad. Out of all of those people, and Austin Shepard. Out of all of those people, it's really difficult for me to say, but Austin Shepard was the one that got on the field, and TJ Clemmings was the guy who defaulted his way onto the field. So Austin Shepard was the 6th lineman. I love him. I think that he's very good. He's not very athletic, which is why he was drafted late. But he's a lot more technically sound than I think a lot of people give him credit for. He was fun to watch. TJ Clemmings, he's going to be on the roster. So if by make it you mean end up starting, maybe him. But he's a pretty easy guess to say he's going to end up on the roster. I think that he was still a good pick, and I think that after playing 2 years of football, of course he was going to fail at right tackle playing right away, and I think that he could still develop and not get into too bad of a headspace from this last season. But Sigmund, you've thought of it.
No, I think that Clemmings, and again, this is going to be a chance to mention Eric Stoner, because he wrote a really tremendous piece.
Phenomenal piece.
On Clemmings last February, where he's, first of all, explaining to you elements of offensive line play that in a way that nobody has explained, and taking something very complex or esoteric knowledge about offensive line play and making it so any intelligent person can understand this, setting up, breaking down TJ Clemmings' game, and basically getting to this idea of what he needs. Is this coachable? Is it something that can be ironed out, or is it potentially a fatal flaw? And what you could see is how potentially dominant or effective he could be when his technique is good. And Eric explains how he can become more consistent with these things and understanding how to execute them and trusting himself. So I think that Clemmings, he was a first, second round level talent, raw talent, fell to the 4th round with an expectation, and he got rushed onto the field, that you're not going to get the value right away from that pick. So I think that there's a good reason. And again, what you want to foster here is competition. Load Holt and Clemmings, Andre Smith, and even Matt Khalil, he shot across his bow that his job isn't necessarily safe if he's outplayed at any point in the season, or just otherwise telling him, you have 4 viable tackles here. You don't have to hand anybody anything, and I think that's always advantageous. But I do think that Clemmings, it's probably woven into their understanding of him that this is the time now, hopefully, that you start to see the reasons that you took him, and he's a player with a very high ceiling for a 4th round pick.
All right.
Tosin at Megas Tosin writes us, do you think it might be better to get Teddy a good route runner like Mike Thomas?
I think versus like a average route runner / athlete, and not versus like Braxton Miller. Like I think that's the opposition we're setting up, right?
Well, and it kind of seems like he's asking the question, like, do we want somebody that's more like the opposite of Cordero Patterson?
Well, I mean, it's just the way I put it like that. I think the question becomes way too easy if you compare him to Cordero Patterson or Braxton Miller or even Kairos Garrett, right? People who have had either very little experience or have shown very little refinement, but do have a lot of upside in terms of the route running. And I think that it's more interesting to ask the question about people who have shown refinement in route running. Like Corey Coleman, for example, has got a lot of work to do, but he's also shown some remarkable refinement in his time at Baylor. Josh Doxson has shown remarkable refinement. at TCU. But I mean, neither of them are nearly as good as, say, Michael Thomas or Sterling Shepard when it comes to route running. So I think that's the question. Like you've got high upside guys like Dotson and Coleman who have shown some refinement but have a ways to go, versus Michael Thomas and Sterling Shepard who are perceived to have low ceilings but are very, very, quote unquote polished. So Bloom, what do you think?
Yeah, and then, I would set up this question if we're looking, say, at number 23. You're looking at this more as a question of, you mentioned Corey Coleman and Josh Doxson and Michael Thomas, and maybe even Laquan Treadwell. And I suppose that, especially people who followed Teddy Bridgewater's career at Louisville, remember Devontae Parker, and I'm sure that you all got tired of talking about Devontae Parker to Minnesota last year. The idea being that he needs somebody. I mean, his deep ball accuracy leaves something to be desired, but we could go back and watch Devontae Parker just go and get it for him at Louisville a lot. So that Josh Doxson would be the player, I think, that gives you that large catch radius, that ability to catch balls way outside of his frame that somebody would be looking for, where Michael Thomas would fit more in what they already do well. I mean, he's more of and he does have a big frame, but he's not necessarily a player who's going to make a spectacular highlight reel play, but he is a player who very subtly is going to use, again, his footwork, changing speeds to create some separation with his routes, in addition to being very strong after the catch, very strong at the catch point, and fitting a more conservative offense. I think that, again, going back to what we talked about, I think Michael Thomas might be the number one receiver in this draft. I think we may see him as the number one wide receiver off of this board. And I would say that regardless of Teddy Bridgewater's strengths or weaknesses or what they have on the wide receiver roster and what they don't have right now, if he's there at number 23 and they take him, I'll be saying that's a great pick. And that's probably, of the four top wide receivers, maybe the one who could pay dividends right away.
All right. Last question. This one is from me directly.
Oh, yeah.
At Dusty O'Connell on Twitter.
Okay, would you put them out, Dusty?
You live in Austin, correct?
Yeah.
That is public information. How much did you interact with South by Southwest?
Yeah, I do. Now, over the last few years, I have a 6-year-old son, and we've gotten out of Austin for South by Southwest because it's crazy. It's a good time to get out if you're not doing something associated with it. This year, I did a little bit of a mix. Went to visit some family with him for 4 days, and I came back. And I came back partially because I wanted to see Anderson .Paak, and this is where I can be Anderson .Paak. But this is where I can be. I can commiserate with some of those younger people because we'll talk. Charles McDonald and many other people, Eric Stoner and so on. Like I'm 40, but I think finally some of the music I like is cool. Kendrick Lamar and melding of jazz and hip hop and things like that.
Like genres that you have always enjoyed are kind of starting to work their way into pop music for a minute.
Yeah. This is a chance for me to be really self-indulgent here and talk about how, like, Miles Davis, my son is named Miles. Miles Davis, had an album called Doo-Bop. I don't remember what it was, like 89, 90, 91, like one of the first, back at the time of, like, this is where I'm really going back, like Us Three and Cantaloupe and stuff like that. The beginnings of jazz and hip hop. Tribe Called Quest, Fife Dog, rest in peace. This idea of these two forms of music really having a lot in common and being able to play off of each other and create a new form of music. So Anderson .Paak, maybe not quite right in the hip hop jazz fold, but certainly like the rapper singer coming out of Dr. Dre's stable, pulling from a lot of different forms. He's going to be the biggest thing in 2016. I think you're going to see this is going to be the summer of Anderson .Paak. It was the South by Southwest of Anderson .Paak. So I had to go back to get out for that. I would have loved South by Southwest like 15 years ago. Actually, about 17 years ago, I worked at South by Southwest when it was still just clubs and bands and music industry people, and maybe like the Flaming Lips.
Was cool. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, when it was so, let me riff on this for a few seconds because it used to just be a music industry. I mean, it really was just a music festival, and there were things that happened. Like the Flaming Lips did their parking garage experiment where they had, like, I don't remember how many cars, like 24 cars, and each one had its own cassette tape, and they like turned the stereos up full blast, and like everybody gathered in the parking garage and they like pressed play on all the stereos simultaneously, There were things like that would happen, but otherwise it was still a music festival. Now it's the Tastemaker Festival, and basically people come to South by Southwest from all over the world, learn what's coming next. Like in 2007, it was Twitter. Learn what's coming next, and then take that back to wherever they are from. And this is internationally. It's put Austin in the international bloodstream, and it's all about ideas. Austin is an idea city, and Austin is, if not a city where ideas originate, it's where they come to prominence. So I that is, while fun, a bit overwhelming for me. I go in and do my surgical strikes. I'll pick a few artists maybe that I want to get out and see. I think a few years ago was Hiatus Coyote. I'm going really obscure here. Australian soul music, neo soul. So I do love it, but at my age, I have to pick my spots. For those of you that could come here in your early 20s and really be able to get up on that wave, it's incredible because it's 24 hours, free booze, free food at a lot of places. Anybody you want to see is going to play like 12 times during the week, and it's incredible. It's something that is really exhilarating, and Austin's really exhilarating. So anybody out there, I would love to help people and enjoy our wonderful city. It is a good time city, and anytime you come here, it's really rivaling like Vegas and New Orleans at this point for if you come here in the mood, have a good time. Oh, you will have a good time.
Well, that's great. I was curious which direction you would take it because, yeah, especially in the last few years, South by Southwest has kind of gone from music festival to, yeah, like tastemaker / technology / like new media
and
festival.
they do like lectures there too.
Yeah,
now.
there's an
in
educational
fact,
South by Southwest EDU talking about like the direction of education in the United States, and it's it's basically everything intersecting through the lens of being forward looking.
And South by Southwest is so important now that even the president shows up to give condescending lectures about journalism.
Yes. And they both picked good places to eat. Torchy's Tacos and I think it was, oh God, I can't remember now the name of the place. Michelle Obama went to a place in my neighborhood for bread pudding. But anyway, I'm really looking forward to, I won't take this into politics, but I'm really looking forward to the Obamas being like the first cool old people couple instead of the president and first lady. I think they'll be much better at being the president and first lady of cool.
So
I think Michelle Obama's going to have that on lock.
She's the real talent. It's like she's the actual talent of the duo there.
So this is going to be my scorching hot take for this show. But they just opened the first Torchy's Tacos in Denver.
Yes.
About 4 blocks from my house.
Ooh.
Wow.
Nice.
A line out the door almost constantly.
Yep.
It's crazy popular. And I've been there twice. Both times the service was okay to not good.
Yep.
And the tacos were okay.
Okay, so I'll give you the tip. I'll give you the tip. The queso. Get the queso. They have one of the best 2 or 3 quesos in Austin, and that's a big deal in Austin, your queso.
Oh, they have good Mexican food in Texas?
Yeah, right. Actual Tex-Mex is pretty gross. Like you call it cheese pile. But
because like you get the cheese on top and it doesn't melt and it's like pre-shredded. Yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah. But get the queso and the green chili pork taco. The green chili. But the thing is, you're in Denver, right? So Denver has some outposts of New Mexican food. I'm from Albuquerque originally, New Mexico, when I was a kid, and I love New Mexican food. I'll take New Mexican food.
Oh, so that's why you like the green chili.
Yeah. Oh, Denver has a deep green chili culture. Like, it's a
so
serious
like
thing around here.
Little Anita's, or go any one of those places in Denver, and you can get great green chili. So I understand, but I would say the green chili pork taco and the queso. But Torchy's also is known for, even when they go outside of places like Austin, they will definitely in their hiring practice encourage nonconformists. So I understand your experience, and obviously if they have lines out the door, the service isn't hurting.
That's fine as counter service. It's not the end of the world, but and I will agree with you that the queso is super legit, and they do have like really good sauces. Yeah. But what killed me is for a place that like claims to have made its bones on street tacos, their tortilla game is weak.
No. They don't do any kind of homemade tortillas. So yeah, if there were some places in Austin that would destroy their tortillas. Their tortillas are, you're right. Actually, that's a good point. Maybe that's something we can get back up the food chain here to them and see what they can do about that.
I use my tiny bully pulpit for whatever I can,
Yeah, change the world.
One Torchy's taco at a time.
Exactly.
I don't know if you've ever listened to the show before, Sigmund, but we talk about food a lot on the show.
So I want to come back and we can do just a food show.
Yes.
Fantastic.
Yes, we've got all these plans for like getting all these like illustrious guests to do things that are totally not football related in like July when there's literally nothing going on in the football world.
And let me know when you're doing the celebrity gossip show too.
Ooh, I support this.
That's interesting. I'd be way out of my depth for that. But I'm not going to bounce out. That's for sure.
Well, all right. It's a date. Sigmund, this has been so awesome. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
It's a great pleasure. And I love being part of this community, and I would just hang out and talk to you all for a couple hours, even if no one's listening, maybe especially if no one was listening.
Well, that's functionally how this show started and how its first season sort of existed. So that fits in with our ethic very neatly. Is there anything that you particularly want to plug? Any projects coming up or articles that you want to put a bug in your ears about?
We're going to keep going leading up to the draft here. I'll be doing the Bloom 100. Really, I'll use that opportunity.
Bloom 100.
This is one of the articles I recommend. It's just I loved playing fantasy football from the beginning in leagues that have full IDP lineups. So when you're doing your rookie drafts, you might be doing a choice between, say, Miles Jack and one of your second-tier receivers, and trying to get at that very elusive topic of ranking these players even before they have teams, just starting the discussion. But I'm going to really use this opportunity again to kick it over to my buddy Matt Waldman in the RSP and just tell people to look into it if you like fantasy football or scouting football players or just understanding football. The RSP is going to be dropping this week. And I think that within the football, Matt Waldman is the musician that other musicians listen to. So if that sounds interesting to you, check it out.
Yeah, the one thing I really love about the RSP is that you learn a lot about players. I mean, there's like 40, 45 players with like really detailed scouting reports, and another 50 players basically where their attributes are ranked and included, and that's fine. You can get that in a lot of places, and he does an extremely good job with that. But the thing that I think I like the most, and there's a lot of things to like about it because it's a huge thing, is that it teaches you a different way to think about looking at players from an evaluation perspective. And he lays out his methodology every single year. It's fantastic. He lays out his methodology in full detail about what he looks for, why he looks for that, whether or not things are easy to fix, whether or not they're hard to fix when it comes in the NFL, and, how much they contribute to success for, each position and stuff like that. And if you've never looked at football with an eye towards scouting, I think that picking up the RSP and reading through it will get you a lot further than a lot of books dedicated to getting you into scouting. So that's what I like about it.
Well, there you go. Sigmund Bloom is at Sigmund Bloom on the Twitter. He is father to Miles and a music enthusiast. You can find his work on the site he owns, or I guess co-owns, footballguys.com. You can find us, Norse Code, on dailynorseman.com or wherever fine podcasts are aggregated. Apologies about the website still being down, and also about the show dropping on a random day. I got just so much stuff going on. It's a weird time for me. I'm juggling a lot of plates, and so we'll just have to live with this for the time being.
Usual, blame Dusty O'Connell.
I know. It's all me. It's not Arif. It's not a guest. Everybody is bending over backwards, mostly to accommodate me because they really need me to read the questions in the mailbag, and consequently, you're getting this episode on a what's it going to be? A Wednesday? Yeah, a Wednesday.
Probably a Wednesday, and, unless James drops the ball, which that's happened.
Well, see, there
really the only blameless person in the show is me.
That's by design. In fact, I think I pitched it to you that way.
Yeah, that's true.
We were saying, like, whatever happens, it won't be your fault. But either way, we will tape a show at some point next week. The intent is to get another super awesome guest, but we don't know who that will be at this point. Until then, make sure you check out the Daily Norseman and say thank you to them for hosting this awesome podcast. If you would like to say thank you with your wallet, then go to paypal.me/NorseCode or patreon.com/NorseCode and flip us a couple of bucks. Shout out to the Reddit community. We post links to the episodes as they appear on Reddit, and there was another Which Vikings podcast should I listen to thread about a week ago, and of course, as per usual, Norse Code was on top, so thanks for the support. We really appreciate it, and we have been noticing a significant uptick in our off-season business this season, so we really appreciate all your hard listening, and we hope that the content that we are creating is worth your time. So with that, Norse Code 126 has come to an end. We will see you next week, but until then, our formula is this: keep Teddy alive. Norse Code is the official podcast of the Daily Norseman SB Nation blog and is produced with cooperation from Pompous Jerk Productions. Pompous Jerk Productions. Attitude with attitude. The opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of their contributors and do not reflect official positions of the Minnesota Vikings, SB Nation, the Daily Norseman staff, or PJP. No information in this podcast should be construed as gambling advice. Please obey all local gaming laws.
Our formula is this. We go out, we hit people in the mouth.